In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. May the glory, the worship, and the praise be to our Lord, God, and Savior Jesus Christ for giving us this opportunity to come to His house, to learn, to spiritually edify and, eat spiritual food, the sacrament, but also His words. And for you guys as well to be here. I feel like there is an echo. There's a little echo. Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. How are you guys doing? Glory be to God. All right. So welcome for the second part of the portion of our service today, what we call the RTD series. We're in week 6. We're almost finishing this series. And through the grace of God, we are able to cover the most part of it, and I hope and I truly pray that it is helpful for most of you guys. And I've heard from some brothers and sisters as well participating in the life group that it's been very helpful. And glory be to God, I'm so happy. But again, for those of you it's the first day or didn't get a chance to really, dig and deep dive of this topic, please do. Because as I mentioned in the first week, every one of us, whether you know it or you don't, this topic touches our life. Either ourselves or our family, our surroundings. This is very, very needed topic. So I highly recommend that you would listen to the past 4 or 5 weeks. But also, the pain of our lives, which is the series, is based off a book titled Healing Your Wounded Soul. Healing Your Wounded Soul. I think they have the picture here. And get the book. It's very helpful, and it edifies you guys in how to deal with negative past experiences in your life, right? So week 5, just to recap very quickly, week 5 is where we started the healing process. And what we said is healing process, actually week 4 is where we started. Week 4 was, if you guys remember, is the grieving, the anger, and how to differentiate the past and the present. But on the week 5, what we said is, it's not that easy. It's not like a flip of a button or something to change everything of our past, how we respond to our past, how we live presently because of our past. It's not that easy. So what we said is, it's like an onion. There are layers, different layers that we need to unpeel. We need to unravel. We need to peel so that we would be able to fully, in due time, we will get healed, right? So last week we covered most parts about expectation and what is hope, what is the difference. We covered some parts. Today we're going to find almost the last part of the layer. And we saved the most important for the last. What we're going to cover next week is how we gonna, after we healed, right? Or after we recovering, how are we gonna see the world? How we participate in life in general? That's what we're gonna cover. But still we're in the healing process, but now it's almost the last part of, and the very important part of the healing process that we're gonna cover today. It's hard, it's not easy, but it's the most needed topic. But as we always do, we're going to start with a letter, a new letter. And I'll read it. Hopefully most people will resonate with this. It says this, "Hi, I've been thinking deeply about the journey I've been on. How far I've come and how much I've had to let go. For the longest time, I carried this immense weight, a burden I didn't even fully understand, until I finally found the strength to comfort it. Since I was young, I was told that my appearance wasn't good enough. It started with small comments, casual jabs about my weight or how I look in clothes. At first, I thought it was just normal, something everyone heard at home. But over time, it grew. The hurtful words became louder, harsher, cutting deeper. I remember one specific time in middle school when I had tried a dress for a family event. My mother looked me up and down, shook her head and said, "You should cut back eating more." And this is an Amharic part. And I've heard this too. በቃ አንቺ ውጭ እየበላሽ ምን አከልሽ? Right? I can still feel the sting of those words. It was just about how I looked. It wasn't just about how I looked. It was as if my worth as a person depended entirely on how I appeared to others. Many of my older relatives continued with these casual jobs and accumulated and changed my perspective about myself. But what I didn't understand back then was that my mom had her own wounds. She had never told she was enough either. Not in terms of success or accomplishments. Her parents, my grandparents, consistently belittled her for not living up to some ideal they had in their heads. They tore her down for failing to become the version of herself they wanted. She projected her pain onto me in a different way, shaming me for my body, as though her frustration with herself were channeling through me. The cycle was vicious and unrelenting. It broke me in ways I couldn't see until much later, leading me down a path of unhealthy habits. I developed an eating disorder, trying to mold myself into someone I wasn't. It wasn't until I hit rock bottom that I realized I needed to change. Not just for myself, but to break this generational cycle of pain and abuse. The hardest part of healing was forgiving. It's strange to think that forgiveness can be so difficult when it involves the people we love most. But that's exactly what made it so hard. I had to forgive my parents, not because they were blameless, but because they were trapped in their own cycles. My mom especially didn't know how to show love in the way I needed because she had never received it in that way herself. She knew criticism, so that's what she gave. And I had to forgive myself for the times I lashed out at others, afraid they're hurting me before I could hurt them. I started by owning up to the ways I had let my own pain spill over into my relationships. I reached out to people I had hurt, people I had pushed away, and apologized. It wasn't easy, but I knew I had to take responsibility for the damage I have caused. I realized that even though I was a victim of verbal abuse, I had become reactive. I would get defensive, even aggressive, before anyone could criticize or judge me, assuming that hurt was inevitable. But healing meant understanding that not everyone was out to get me. And I didn't need to protect myself by pushing others away. In my healing process, I learned to pursue and reflect before reacting. Every time I felt tempted to snap, to revert to that defensive part of myself, I made a conscious decision to stop, think, and analyze. I asked myself, is that really about them or is it about my past? That simple habit changed everything for me. It's not that I never feel tempted to slip back into old patterns. I do, all the time. But I've learned how to catch myself before I fall. I've also created healthy boundaries, especially with my family. It's not about shutting them out. It's about protecting both them and me. I know now that we can't heal together if we keep tearing each other down. So I limit the time I spend around toxic energy and the conversation I engage in. These boundaries have given me space to breathe, to rebuild myself in a way that doesn't perpetuate the pain. As I continue healing, I've become much more aware of how I treat others. I refuse to pass my pain onto them. I've broken the pattern that had plagued my family for generations. I can't control everything, but I can control how I respond, how I love, and how I choose to interact with those around me. The journey isn't over. I don't think it's even ever truly is, but I'm proud of how far I've come. I'm learning every day to be kinder, to be gentler, not just with others, but with myself. I hope one day I can help others who have been through the same things, because no one deserves to feel like they're not enough. This is deep. And if we are honest, majority of us know this situation or experienced this. If you guys remember, the first week we clearly stated that it's not about blaming anyone. It's collectively understanding that we are all traumatized in some way. And that is being projected in different ways, in sideways, and what we discussed past couple of weeks in how it would spill out from us. But now, today what we continue is, as I said, I'm excited, the last peel, the very important, the core of the healing process of any traumatic experience that happened towards you. It is hard, but as I said, it's very necessary. It's the big F word, the big forgiveness. Forgiveness. It's not easy. And you have an option. God never makes us to subjugate and do things. He gave us our own choice. And this is an option. You can either take it, or you can't, or you won't. It's all up to you. So don't feel pressured, but we ought to let you know that there is an option. So in the healing process, eventually it comes down to a question. How do I feel about when I think of that exact experience 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever the case, that exact experience, and the person who perpetuated it or the person responsible to it? What do you feel when you think of that? What do you feel? And almost 100%, most of us, we feel anger. We feel being deceived. We feel anger. And if you remember, 2 weeks ago, we talked about the first part of the grief. The anger that needs to be resolved, the grief that needs to be resolved, right? So it's okay. Having that feeling means you're normal. So any grief includes an anger stage. We talked about that. But we do not want to get stuck there. Where we have felt anger, we will need to find forgiveness. When we felt anger, we need to find forgiveness. But you would ask, you would tell me, But because he's like, you didn't experience what I experienced. You're not in my shoe. It's not an easy thing like my sister stealing my shoes. It's not an easy thing like coming late. What happened to me is excruciating. It's so painful. That affected me physically, mentally, emotionally. So it's not easy as you said. I agree. 100%. But listen to what Saint Gregory the Great, one of our church fathers, said. He said it in this way. The more grievous the wound inflicted by our brother, the greater is the merit of the forgiveness we bestow. See, as humans, we think the easier things, it's easy to forgive. Because we understand the forgiveness in a worldly sense, just to live, in a tranquility and a nice way. No, forgiveness is the innermost, the most way that you experience or manifest being like Christ is forgiveness. So when the infliction is the most gravest, it's so hard. Like, I can forgive others, but this cannot be forgiven. That means if you forgive that, the merit is so much more. The blessing is so much more. Think of it in this way. Not in the worldly sense of I'm sorry. If you forgive the gravest, the merit is the most. So because of that, we need to be willing, or we need to see at least the option there is of forgiving someone who inflicted the gravest wounds. It's an option. One other question that people would raise this. Okay, I understand the point, and I need to pursue that. But I'm still in the healing process. I'm still like figuring out the wounds that happened to me. I'm actually still dealing with the infliction right now. Can I forgive? See, because we think usually like it's easier to forgive if it is a year old. If it is 2 years old, the healing process is good. I mean, I can forgive more because I kind of forget it. 5 years, 10 years? But the icon, the pioneer example for us of forgiveness is who? The Passion. Christ. Was Christ forgiving those who inflicting his wounds after 40 days of his resurrection? After his ascension? See, it can happen. While people are inflicting wounds, forgiving. That's actually the utmost spiritual way of forgiveness, as Christ forgave while they're spitting upon him. So sometimes we give in the excuse of, no, it's not like, yeah, in the future I can forgive, but not now. It doesn't weigh water. There is an option to forgive too. Other things that would help you also to forgive, for you to forgive. Again, when we say forgive, don't think of it that what had happened is not, we're not saying what had happened is not happened, or we're not saying it's easy, we're not saying it's your fault. The person is truly 100% accountable or the situation. But maybe, even if it seems outrageous, maybe thinking of what is the initiation for them to do these things might help us, not them, us to forgive. We can more readily attain this type of forgiveness when we have some understanding of why the other behaved as they did. If you remember in the letter, the girl, what truly helped her to understand is understanding how the parent was inflicting the wounds, where is that coming from? So understanding why the other person is behaving this way helped her to truly heal for herself. Maybe the other person does not have a chance to heal. Have you ever thought about that? You, on the other hand, God gave you the chance to truly heal, to discern, to reflect, to pass over that experience. Maybe the other person does not. Again, we're not saying we're giving an excuse, but something to consider. When you consider this, there is another door in your heart that opens. It talks about in the book. A heart of actually, wow, I can forgive if I see different, ways of where things are happening. It is not a door that we have to go through. It's an option. But if we dare pass through it, we may take a major step in our own theosis. See, the goal was theosis, right? We do this out of love. Before we continue to the next part. But sometimes, even these things. And when I say it, you probably get it. I understood it. And that's right. But I am not able to, I can't. I'm still holding something. When that happens, don't shame yourself. Because we talked about this before, right? Shaming ourselves. Don't shame yourself. Say that, yes, I'm holding, and, we talked about the anger, the grieving time. The most important thing is to be in the process of forgiveness, to desire it, to pursue it, and not to get stuck in anger or resentment. So when we say forgiveness is a process, not an instantaneous event. Forgiveness is a process, not an instantaneous event. And even sometimes when you do feel like you forgave someone, but continue being unsafe around that person, or something that reminds you of that person, that situation, right? Understand again, like I said, do not shame yourself and know that it is normal. It means that you have an emotional memories. We talked about our subconscious that always grasps everything that happens in our life. So, yeah, you may have that emotional memories. And we need to work through, and it takes more time. So forgiving is a position of strength, not a weakness. Forgiving is a position of strength, not of weakness. However, when you forgive, don't have this. Remember we talked about splitting? If you guys were here, there was a splitting behavior that everything is good or everything is bad. So don't have this mindset, okay, I'll forgive you, but from here on, if anything happens, of course, we learn of how to create boundaries. We'll talk about that. But forgiving someone does not guarantee that you might not get hurt again. in being vulnerable, there are no guarantees that we will not be hurt again. There is no guarantees. But what is there then? It is important for us to note and remember that if we do get hurt again after forgiving someone, this is very important. This is the most important thing that I want you to get. That does not necessarily mean the past is happening all over again. If you're being hurt again, that doesn't mean like, oh, the past already passed. Your response is maybe different because now, before you didn't get an opportunity to heal or to respond in a positive way. Now you have. But don't sabotage yourself thinking that, oh, it's happening again all over. So my feeling is going to be the same. How I responded to it is going to be the same. No. It is important for us to know that and remember that if we do get hurt again after forgiving someone, that does not necessarily mean the past is happening all over again. In fact, in the book it says, in fact, each time we get hurt, we can learn to view these inevitable situations as an opportunity to respond in a healthier way. So when it happened again, maybe it happened the next time, third time, fourth time. You know what's going to happen? We should see those things as a practice. To practice being hurt without feeling traumatized. To practice being hurt without feeling traumatized. All what we learned the past week and the week before. That's where if you unfortunately get hurt, you wouldn't get traumatized. First, we talked about like expectation and hope, right? If you hope something, not expected. So if the hurt comes, you hoped, there is no expectation, so the way you react to it is in a healthier way now. But when we say all these things, we're not saying, we never justify what occurred, nor do they make everything that happened suddenly okay. We're not saying that. We're not saying that. So, when we see forgiveness, right? Forgiveness is forgiving someone who inflicted wounds towards us in any way. That is towards someone, we talked about this whole series, there is a relation that's about perspective about us, about others, and with God. So we're forgiving someone who inflicted wounds. But now, what about ourselves? We need to forgive ourselves in this kind of situation. We talked about that. I'll give you 3 ways that we need to forgive ourselves. The first one. The first incident, that traumatic, negative incident that happened before. Forgiving yourself, saying that what had happened is not our fault. Is not our fault. There is a long time, in the old days of my life, okay? There is this movie that I saw. I think the title is, if I'm not mistaken, A Beautiful Mind or something. It's one of the actors called Matt Damon was playing in that movie. And the movie is, the character is very, very smart. Very smart. And he's a janitor in one of the Ivy League schools, I think MIT or Harvard or something. If you remember that movie, if you saw it, one thing that really, caught me is, so they put him into a therapy session with someone, right? And he's so defensive. If you remember, he was very defensive the way he responded to the person because he doesn't want to, that fear of vulnerability, right? He's guarding himself. So he's always avoiding people. But there's this one thing that he said, I think Robin Williams was the psychiatrist. In their last session, you know what he did? He called him and they were conversating. And he said to him, "It's not your fault. It's not your fault." So the first time when he said that to him, he said, "Oh yeah, I know it's not my fault." But he said to him, No, like you're not hearing me. It's not your fault. He said, "I know. It's not your fault." He said that again and again to his face at least 3-4 times. And he got mad. Finally, he broke down. He broke down crying, like sobbing, crying. Because sometimes we say things, we don't really mean it. We don't put it into our heart. Someone says like, "Yeah, it's not your fault." Say, "Oh yeah." We feel like they're saying it just to avoid things, to get away. And we reflect that on ourselves, also say like, "It's not your fault. Okay, but God, let's just move on." No, but deep down, we know that we already believe that it's our fault. But when that time comes, when we truly open and say, understand, and truly from the bottom of our hearts believe that it's not our fault, things change. So first, forgiving ourselves that it's not our fault. Second, forgiving ourselves that we didn't realize this for so long. Because sometimes, okay, it's not my fault, but I will still convict myself that how couldn't I didn't know this for a long time? I'm struggling, so I must be stupid. I must be, we still convict ourselves. Give yourself a break too. Forgive yourself even though you didn't realize it for a long time. For that specific purpose, forgive yourself. Thirdly, forgive yourself for making wrong decisions based on that past event. First, forgive yourself because it's not your fault of what happened, because you think that it's because of your fault. Second, because of not believing, because of not realizing that and going in a wrong direction, or not realizing that sooner, forgive yourself. Finally, forgive yourself for the wrong decisions, the wrong reactions, lashing out, and all of those things, the reactions, forgive yourself. This is towards you. The second part that we're going to see today is this: becoming the family healer of generational pain. Becoming the family healer of generational pain. This is very, very important. If we truly sit down and think of all the reactions, the negatives, and everything that happened, and if we examine, there is this thing called, it's also mentioned in the book called genogram. Do you guys know what genogram is? It's kind of your family, tracing your family tree kind of thing. But also there are some ways to trace in the family tree, not physical illnesses or different things, but also if there is any generational pain, traumatic experience. In the book it mentions that there is similar trajectory, especially for people that are in the family of abuse or addiction, a family conflict. But it says in the book, it's a sad and tragic legacy in which no generation begins the healing process. If you guys remember, in the first week, I showed you one cartoon picture, an old person saying his child, "You're not good enough," and the other child would say that for his child, You're this and this. But finally, one of the generation will block that and say to his child, you're good. And that child flourishes. He starts being creative, being confident in his life. So maybe one thing you need to understand is this healing process, of course it's for you, but there is a lot hanging on the balance of what you choose. Choosing forgiveness and healing hangs the balance of the next generation. I used to talk to some people throughout my service, and we talk about family, dynamics, problems, things like that. And they would probably mention along the line, the guys would mention, my dad is this. But I will never be like him. My mom, she did all this, but like that, of course, negative experience or behavior, I will never be like him. We all have that intention, and I've heard that so much from so many people. Intentions are important. Intentions are good, and it is important. But without an insight and a self-awareness, it's just ambition. Unless that comes from the healing work, believe me when I say this, we will find ourselves reenacting the same relationship patterns we grew up with. You probably heard this. I've heard so many ways. If there is an abusive father, and the child seeing that dynamic with father abusing the mother and everything, but he didn't do anything, and he's not part of it. He just witnessed it. But there is a subconscious what we're talking about. What do you guys think would happen in the future if he doesn't heal from this when he starts his own relationship? That is what he knows. How to respond into conflict. And this is what tearing our generation and the whole world today. Intentions are important, but without the insight and deep self-awareness that comes from the healing work, we may find ourselves reacting the same relationship patterns we grew up with. There's a biblical story about intentions and why it's important. And not to be emotional and say, I'm not going to be like them at all. I'm going to be like a good person and everything. It's a bit emotional unless you heal your mentals. In Matthew chapter 21, verse 28, there's a story of a parable of the two sons. Christ talked about a person who had two sons. And in the parable, he asked one of his sons, say, son, go in the field and work and, do, progress or whatever in their farm and come back. You know what the son says? The son said, okay, father, like that, you're right, I should do it, I will do it. And when you read the parable, he said yes to the dad, but he ended up not doing it. But the other brother, he said, he was asked the same question. He said, Father, like I'm tired, I can't do this right now. And he said, I'm not going to do it, right? But then later on, he felt the conviction, and he went on to obey his dad and do what he asked. The reason why I brought up that parable is this. I don't think the first child is just he wants to lie the dad. I don't think that's the reason. I personally don't think that. What I think is, as most of us, the first child is emotional. The first child is emotional. When you hear a sermon, I've got to change my life. I'm going to start today. I started now. When tomorrow comes, we don't do it. When someone asks you, for sure I'm going to do it. But we won't. So it's not about intention. So changing the generational cycle is not only intention. It needs self-awareness and to work, like real work. So no matter the original cause or source of the generational pain, each generation has the potential and calling to be the one that stops that dysfunction. And in the book it says, how a beautiful calling to fulfill. You may not know it right now. But what you decide, the healing and how to respond, and how to forgive and everything, the next generation, thousands of people of responding to it, maybe that hangs on the balance. Maybe you have the key to change that. It's not about only you. Isaiah chapter 58 says this, your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and will raise up the age-old foundations. You will be called repairer of broken walls. You will be called repairer of broken walls. How great achievement is that? When we pass in the future, when we get old or whatever, when we stand in front of God, when the Lord calls you, my son, look at my son, the repairer of the generation. The repairer of the generation. So perhaps our healing work even has a sacrificial nature. It has a sacrificial nature as well. It's not only for yourself, but for the generation. Continuing, when we learn to apply the concepts of the following, after this, there are 2 points, and we'll conclude. I know it's a bit late. The part of our brain that records negative memories, lessons, and feelings can be rewired. In the therapy field, there is something called a limbic system. Limbic system. It's a part of our brain that records past emotions, feelings, what happened, all of those things. So there is a therapy called the limbic therapy. It's a therapeutic way that we can learn new ways of relating to ourselves and with others in the world by giving ourselves a new experience. Now this forgiving and the way how we react in the last part of our healing, it's a habitual things that we do to really rewire ourselves. When something happened, we don't go back of how we responded 20 years ago. So the next part, we saw about forgiving someone who inflicted wounds towards us. Secondly, we saw how we actually should forgive ourselves for how we reacted, for not believing in ourselves and all of those. I understand. But the next one is accountability. Now the next layer of forgiveness, we're still in forgiveness, it's not only forgiving others. It's not only forgiving yourself. Maybe throughout that reaction, because of your past experience, most of us hurt people. We hurted more people in our life. So we need to take accountability of that and ask forgiveness. Asking forgiveness. It says, it is not reasonable for others in our lives to suffer indirectly for the misdeeds of the people who hurt us. When someone gets closer to us to befriend or relation, whatever the case, we're guarding ourselves. We're shunning people away, confusing people because of our 20 years ago experience. That's not fair for them. The way we react to our children because of the parents. the way we lash out to people because of what happened. We need to address that. How do we address that? Two ways. If it was mild, if it wasn't too, big damage that is done, just a nice gesture and showing, affection and, remedying the relationship, that could be easy. But if the damage is big and you really hurt the person, you may owe it to the other person to apologize and seek forgiveness. Why? Because you know how it's going right now. When we're doing that, we're creating another vicious circle for that person. Because if it doesn't know what is happening, if we do not, the other person may internalize it, internalize our reaction to them, believing indeed that they are the problem now. So they're thinking that it's my fault now. They're thinking that negative experience, they're feeling it. So they may be projected on other people. It continues as a snowball, right? So we need to take accountability and ask forgiveness. Seeking forgiveness is liberating and is a powerful source of humility. If you're struggling with humility, there's a powerful source of attaining humility is seeking forgiveness. Apology is a sacramental act. It's a sacred and a sacramental act. But how do we do it? Because this is very important. Because this word that we use, it's so watered down and lost value is sorry. Sorry. I'm sorry if I offended you. Sorry. And then moving on. That's not true deep-hearted apology. In the book it says in a great way, if a person who's just saying sorry just to say it, or saying the one sorry if I offended you, such apologies are symptoms of spiritual immaturity and laced with pride. It's a spiritual immaturity. So how do you do it? This is how you do it. It needs to have 5 components if you truly want to do like a true seeking of forgiveness. 1, we need to regret what happened. We need to regret. 2nd, we need to be remorseful. It sounds similar, but it's different. Regret focuses more on wishing things were different. That's regret. But remorse includes a moral or ethical dimension and desires to do right what is wrong. Those two are different. So you need to regret and be remorseful. Thirdly, identifying how the other person is affected. You have to know how you affected the other person. 4th, statement and affirmation to correct the injury that was caused. You need to make the statement of the injury that you caused and affirm that. I've done this to hurt you. And 5, sharing as to what was occurred in us. What does that, created for us to act in that way? This is truly seeking forgiveness. And I don't recommend it. My confessors know that. I don't like saying the word sorry. Even if it's short, try to say the word I apologize or forgive me for doing this. Because sorry is really watered down now. For everything we just say sorry. Next part of the healing process, self-awareness and our reaction. We hopefully will find ourselves pausing more and thinking more before we speak to act. Now, we're finishing the healing process. Okay, so what do you do? When something new experience comes, self-aware. Before you react into any situation, self-aware. In the book it says this: we are too quick, I think it's on the, we are too quick to believe our impulsive thinking and feeling, and too quick to dismiss what is reality. That is our generation. We believe our impulsive behavior too quickly. That's like, it has to be done. Our tendency in our world today is to avoid feeling of like really things, to think through things. Our tendency to avoid, if it takes too much of thinking, avoid, suppress, act out, or self-medicate. That's what we do. We avoid, suppress, act out, or self-medicate. Or sometimes even blaming others for things that are happening. And it says this: if we think, I don't know if I put it that way, but read it in the book. It says, if we think, then we feel. But many today don't want to feel. If we stop and don't react, think things through, take time and allow ourselves to look with objectively, we may see certain truths in ourselves, an ugly truth, things that we hate about ourselves. And because of that, we don't want to feel. We don't want to think. We put ourselves always as a victim of something. It's because of this. It's because of that person. That tells you where you are spiritually and emotionally. The emotional immaturity and spiritual immaturity. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, that's the right way. A mature person, emotionally and spiritually, this is how he acts. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. So what do? We take captive of every thought to make it obedient to Christ. We take every thought captive. All right, some thought comes to my mind. Make it a captive. What does that mean? Reflect. Think through before acting of that thought. It seems mechanical. It seems like robotic. But believe me, when you train yourself to do this again and again and again and again, it becomes a normal. It becomes normal how to respond to things. I told some of you, and I think at least one person that I know that person who's unnamed, that person always says a she for everything. Yes, for everything. If someone comes in and asks him, can you please do this? Yes. If someone comes in and asks, can you please take this project? Yes, yes. And that person overstretched himself to the point that it's so stressful. That means this kind of mentalities we don't think through, we don't analyze. So I give the person a little, exercise. I told the person saying, when someone asks a favor or to do things, don't respond right away. Say, let me check my calendar. Let me see if I have another schedule. And I'll respond back to you. That gives you time to really, sit down, reflect, think through, and then respond. This is just an example. You can do multiple things for you, but every thought, how many thoughts a person have throughout a day? Every thought needs to be captive to the obedience of Christ. It means reevaluating. Am I reacting to this thought as obedient of Christ, as how Christ commanded me or not? Learning to respond to the present without the pain of the past dictating our actions and responses. So what that means is this. This would be your motto. Learning to respond to the present without the pain of the past dictating our actions and responses. There are 2 points that I'm going to skip, but hopefully you'll discover it. It's about expanding our hearts, how we work through this, how our hearts would have more space to care for people, and you'll learn that reading the book. And thirdly, the other point is memory makers, how everything that we do, we're creating memory to people, right? So throughout our healing process, we need to be very cautious of how we're creating. Memories we create in others can actually endanger their salvation. But the last point, and before we conclude, when we talk about healing, and when we talk about forgiving, when we talk about, letting ourselves out there, where is the balance of creating boundaries and being open-hearted for a relationship? This is very important. So what we think is creating boundaries and being vulnerable and, loving all others, we feel like those two contradicts. It doesn't. It doesn't. It actually both goes aligning, or one supplementing, complementing the other. Setting a boundary does not mean we stop loving the other. It doesn't mean that we cut them out or we ignore them. That's not what setting boundary means. But it is often in the best interest of both people. It gives a good example of a person who's self-medicating and addicted to, for example, alcoholism or drinking, right? If you don't create boundaries, that's just one example, but in such cases, we become enablers, enabling the person to go in that direction. So creating boundary is very much needed from the source of love and care for the other. So when you create boundary, change your mindset of thinking it's not only about you. If that's the case, it contradicts of how can I love the other. No, think of that, I create a boundary because I care for the other person too. Because if I don't, I'm giving an opportunity for the person to commit another gravest mistake. So create boundary. It is not unchristian to create boundaries. It is not unchristian to create boundaries. It's actually a Christian way to do it. What if the person is not inflicting wounds, but at least for you guys, is a person who persuasive, pressuring for you to commit sin? See? For us, it's easier to create boundaries for other cases, but we don't create boundaries for such kind of people. That's why most of us struggle in progressing in our spiritual life. Creating boundaries for those who enable us, who pressure us to go into a path that is destructive or ungodly. That is also we need to create boundaries. Matthew chapter 5, verse 30, Christ talked about if your right hand makes you to stumble, what did he say? Cut it out. Cut it out. He's not talking about our limbs. He's talking about someone that's closer to you. Oh, we've been friends for a long time. We grew up together. Okay. You have a choice. You want to truly to be healed and to pursue theosis, to be like God? Or you want to live just subnormal life? It's your choice. If we choose not to create space or cut ties from one who exerts influence or pressure on us to sign, the greater danger is that they will cut us off from Christ themselves. They will cut us. They will make us to be cut from Christ. So we need to create boundaries, especially for people that are peer pressuring us. we might not say they're peer pressuring us, but for the most part, we actually are the ones who are pressuring ourselves to be in that situation. I understand that. But still, we need to cut ties from such dynamic or group. We create boundaries only when necessary, and we do it with love and in such a way as not to wound or shame the other person. That's a way that we create boundaries. But there's one last thing that we say. There is also overactive boundaries. What that means is we're creating boundaries because of the reaction of our past experience. And without finishing our process of healing, when we see some traits, triggers of that person, like we completely cut boundaries. That's not what I'm talking about, creating boundaries. That's not out of love. That's because if you really think of it, it's because of our past reaction. So we need to be careful of that. We're done for today. Next week would be the last part, which means we finished our healing process in how we will react moving forward. We'll talk about how the future reactions of our life, how we can maintain that in a godly way. But this is the way that we need to address our past negative traumatic experiences. I hope and pray that God truly make me and also the book and there's discussions and the life groups and the sermon, everything, a vessel for you truly, truly to be healed. I've seen especially our generation of the first, second generation of the immigrants from our community. This topic by itself is a taboo. We don't talk about it. But in every household, there is so much burden of traumatic experience that we experienced in our life. In every house. That's what hindering us to truly not to live the potential, the purpose that God put in our heart. But I hope and pray that this starts us to really uncover most of this so that we could truly heal and pursue what God put in our hearts to glorify Him and to create His kingdom. Glory be to God.